this morning when I spoke earlier. I'm Wade Warren. I'm with Deloitte Consulting, and I'm the chair of the SID board. That was not intended to be an applause line, but thank you. So let me get started. 15 months ago today, Russia attacked Ukraine in an unprovoked act of aggression, the likes of which the world has seen only rarely in the 8 decades since the conclusion of World War II. Ukraine defended itself with unexpected resolve, resulting in a war that has caused 300,000 casualties and displaced 6 million people. The war has challenged the norms of international law and order. It has reoriented energy trade around the world, and it has led to the expansion of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It has raised the specter of the use of nuclear weapons, and along with climate change and COVID, it has contributed to the worst food security crisis in modern history, affecting countries around the world, and especially in sub-Saharan Africa. Oksana Sergeyevna Markarova has been the Ukrainian ambassador to the United States since February 2021. I think it's safe to say that when she took her post, she had little idea world events would transform her a year later into one of Ukraine's most eloquent advocates at this time of existential threat to her country. Before becoming ambassador to the United States, Oksana Markarova was Ukraine's Minister of Finance. And prior to entering government, she spent 17 years working in private equity and financial advisory fields. She's a proud Hoosier with a master's degree in public finance and trade from Indiana University. Ambassador Markarova, the Washington Post ran a profile of you last month, and they said that you are everywhere. I can't speak to that, but I'm glad to say that you're here with us today. Please come to the podium, and we eagerly await your remarks. I will note the ambassador has a hard stop at 4:30. She tells me she's going to offer a few comments, and then she is willing to take questions from the audience, which I will moderate. So please be formulating your questions now, and we are delighted to hear from you.
Thank you, Wade. Thank you very much. Of course I would be here. How can I miss meeting the best of the development society, which actually is very important player in not only getting to the peace right now, and the peace not only in Ukraine, but globally, but especially to maybe even reform and change the ways we actually think of the developmental world and our agenda. And I really like your title, The Shaping of the Development for the Next Decade, because this war for 455 days not only created horrible devastation in Ukraine, not only completely shattered the international law and essentially threatened the global security architecture as we knew it, not only created unbelievable tragedies for so many Ukrainian families, whether they're in Ukraine or outside of Ukraine, but also have changed the way we used to look at the development in general. We have focused, and there were so many real problems in the world that all of us were trying to deal together, from climate to the big divide, to the digital divide, to fighting poverty in so many places, to fighting inequality, to actually working on gender equality, and so many real problems that required to be addressed even in developed nations, but especially in nations in transition like Ukraine, and even more so in places which are less fortunate. But this war, Russia essentially diverted all of our attention from improving lives in all the countries to essentially fighting a very existential war for Ukraine, but also existential war for democracy. So no, we cannot put it aside and continue life as usual, but also we cannot forget about the real problems that exist still in the world, and that essentially not only creating risk, Russia not only created risks for Ukraine, I mean military, security risk, immediate risk, not only created risks for the rest of the world, food, energy, and other crises, but also created risks for our stable and sustainable development as the planet, because we have to deal with this and because we have to address this instead of continuing addressing a number of other items. And I think it's very important to acknowledge, I know we all now focused, especially in Ukraine, we're focused on winning this war. For us, it's a life and death question. For us, it's, again, existential question, whether we will continue to exist as the country. But after we win the war, we have to win the peace. And again, win the peace not only in Ukraine. We have to rebuild Ukraine in a way that is going to be not only beneficial for the people of Ukraine, build back better so we can leapfrog into this new innovative Ukraine, but also how Ukraine can become an answer to so many global problems. And also, I think, worth to mention is how these 15 months have shown that any development and any assistance and aid in the countries really reaches its goal when it's building local institutions, when you build the local capacity. In the first weeks of this horrible war, when understandably the majority of embassies and international partners moved away from the war zone, I mean, it is a full-fledged war, and we do not blame anyone for that, of course. But it was the Ukrainian civil society, it was the Ukrainian government, it was the institutions that were built for decades using the international assistance that continued to work in Ukraine, in healthcare, in education, in anti-corruption fight, in local development, in decentralization reform. And all these institutions, Ukrainian institutions, very quickly transformed into those that were delivering food to the front lines, taking care of the wounded, trying to help Ukrainians to relocate, and they actually completely fulfilled this function until it was relatively safe for others to come back. And I think there is a lot of lessons learned from Ukraine in how we all should, or what we have to change in the way we actually do it outside. So when we do it in other countries, the more we can do to develop local capacity, local institutions, the more results we will have from each dollar the taxpayers, either in the US or in any other country, are actually spending on development. So I would like to finish with yesterday we have presented in Washington, D.C., DIA, our platform, our digital platform, which we're using in Ukraine for almost 20 million Ukrainians now, for everything from our passports, communication with the government, signing the documents, or even receiving the social protection and aid payments. And I was very proud that yesterday we announced that we will be sharing it with a number of countries, with Zambia in particular, with Colombia, that we will start exporting it, and Ukraine will be donating our part, and USAID will be helping us to help these countries to use it in their countries. And I think this is just one example how Ukraine, again, can be part of solution of so many global problems, and hopefully together we can not only return to peace, but continue doing what you all have been doing and what is your mission to improve our world and to make it better for everyone, for the citizens of each country. Thank you very much. God bless America. And while you are working here, we'll check, Slava Ukraini. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. As I mentioned, she has to leave exactly at 4:30. We have 15 minutes for questions, which will be 3 to 5 questions probably. So please line up at the microphones. Catherine, I see you heading to the microphone. We have, in addition to the 1,000 people in the room here, we have about 1,000 online, and we're receiving questions online as well. So Catherine, if you have questions for us.
So participant Matthew Crichton from our virtual audience asks, taking into account Ukraine's heroic efforts navigating the conflict, but also recognizing the pressing global issue of climate change, how do you envision the integration of climate resilient strategies into Ukraine's reconstruction and development efforts post-conflict? And additionally, how can we, as members of the international community, best support Ukraine in this work?
Thank you. Very important question. Not only there is a huge damage to the infrastructure and in general in Ukraine, and the World Bank estimated in the latest RDNA assessment, the rapid damage assessment report, that it's about 411 billion worth of destruction. It's just the physical destruction. It's not anything in addition. It's just, there was a building, it's destroyed, this is the value of the building that we lost. But, we cannot, we only start to understand how much environmental damage to Ukraine, to the ecosystems, and to the region in general is caused by this war. So it's going to be a big, not to mention, by the way, the nuclear threats from Russians still occupying and holding the largest nuclear station, which is in Ukraine and now illegally held by the Russians, not to mention the contamination of the waters and underground waters, and actually destruction of the forests, something that, again, right now the goal is to win. But if you take a look at the environmental damage, is huge. And Ukraine, by the very nature of where we are located, by the rivers that flows from Ukraine into the Black Sea and everywhere, we are very much interconnected, all of us in Europe. And the implications of the environmental and climate damage in Ukraine is huge. But on the reconstruction side, if you take a look at the first position papers that are put already by the Ukrainian government, and we discussed it in Lugano and other conferences, and it will be discussed again on the reconstruction soon in June in London, we really would like our reconstruction and even the rapid recovery that we do now all to be very environmentally friendly and all according to the green transition, both in energy, which is one of the top 5 priorities, energy, humanitarian demining, critical infrastructure. In all of these areas, we're looking at all the solutions that are going to be climate friendly and are going to be the latest that we have. And I think, and with the energy strategy that we already published, the 10-year plan that we designed for Ukraine, if you take a look at it, it specifically focuses on adding the renewables, adding the storage capacity, adding the decreasing rapidly the coal mines and the least environmental friendly areas, so that we can build something more efficient and effective and green at the same time. So innovations and climate friendliness are the 2 priorities that goes across all the subsectors of the future development. What can you do? You can all be part of it. And you can start thinking about it now. When we win the war, I always tell when I talk to business, and given my experience in private equity, I know what I'm talking about. I always tell them when we win, it's going to be too late for you to start. So the time is now. Yes, there is heavy fighting. Yes, the war is not over, but we need all of your brain and resources and energy to start talking to us, thinking about what you can do in all the areas. And we would be happy at the embassy to put you with your counterparts back home, so please use us as a resource. Thank you.
I'm Sunita Sharma, Vice President Health at Palladium. Thank you very much for such an inspirational speech. I've done a lot of work in Ukraine and special place in my heart. But I wanted to ask you, especially for health systems strengthening, your vision, because health is so important overall for the future, and you emphasize that it's very important institutional building and local organizations. So we are thinking long term, but it'd be great if you can share your vision for health systems strengthening.
Well, first, right before the war, we were in the middle of reforming of our health system. Now, I shouldn't say right before the war because, as you know, war started in 2014, but it was contained in, unfortunately, Crimea and Donetsk and Lugansk Oblast, and it was so-called ceasefire, which means Russians shoot at us, we do not shoot at them. But at least, it was peace in the 90% of the country. So we used those 8 years of the Russian type of ceasefire for developing everything in Ukraine. And healthcare was one of the critical sectors. So we completely did the reform of the primary healthcare system, restarted it, and it's already showing big results. And we were about to start the secondary level reform when the full phase of the war started. So on top of some inefficiencies and lack of capacity in the sector before, now huge destruction of the healthcare facilities, overload of what our health practitioners have to do now for obvious reasons. We have a lot of people we have to treat, the wounded, the veterans, civilians that constantly are under attacks, and we have horrible number of cases, difficult cases, polytrauma, and we all are behind vaccination schedules, something that people do not usually talk about, but imagine for 15 months to be in a full-fledged war type of situation. So the disruption to healthcare, which was not completely ideal before, is huge. So first, we have to, of course, we value any help that we are receiving now, and we do receive a lot of help in form of donations, medical donations. We have so many brave doctors, and I want to use this opportunity to say how grateful we are, who travel to Ukraine, the Doctors Without Borders, but so many just regular volunteers, especially from the US, who operate in our surgery rooms, in Lviv, in Dnipro, in Kyiv, in so many places. So right now, focus, of course, is how to sustain the effort now, how to help to mitigate some of the risks. But following our victory, and the Ministry of Health is already working very actively on the reform. We already are planning the next stage of the reform. We even are doing a lot of steps right now while we are fighting on the front line. So healthcare is a very important part of that. I think, there is a lot we can do there. And again, in healthcare, this is one of the areas with very strong medical institutions and universities in Ukraine, where we actually can become a hub, not only for Ukraine, but in the future, following the full reform, for not only the neighboring countries, but also, for example, before the full-fledged war, we had many students in our medical schools from many countries in Africa, in Asia, where it's closer to them to fly to Ukraine than to some other locations. And price-wise, it was a very good education for the money they have been paying to be educated in Ukraine. So again, from education to actually developing the secondary, the specialized education, Ukraine has one of the most progressive transplantation. Is that the word? Transplantation? Transplantation laws. So we do allow to transplant, and actually our transplantologists are already making surgeries in Ukraine. There was a recent one a couple of weeks ago, very complex one with liver and other internal. So, there is a lot we can do together. And again, by using innovations, our goal is to develop rapidly after we win. That will require many, many, many partners to come to Ukraine. So healthcare is one of the sectors where we deregulated it. We are ready to do it even more. We are ready to reform, and I think it's going to be one of the very attractive sectors to work. Thank you.
We can take maybe two more questions. I see there's someone at the mic. Catherine, are there any more questions from online? Okay, go ahead, please.
Sure. I'm David Hunter with WSP. Also worked and lived in Ukraine many years, so continue to be inspired by Ukraine's spirit. The question is on the information space. In addition to fighting a hot war, you're fighting against sort of vicious Russian propaganda that's not only affecting you, but the West, including the US. I wonder if you could share anything that you've learned as a country about how to battle that, where they're using a strength of the West and democracies, the freedom of information and interaction, to try to undermine and fray at the social fabric and undermine democracy.
That's one of the most important questions that we have been discussing when this full-fledged war started, but even before, because Ukraine has been subjected to the Russian propaganda not for the last year, not for the last even 30 years, but literally for 300 centuries, where the whole world has seen us through the lenses of the Russian propaganda, whether it was the Russian Empire, Soviet Union, or Russian Federation. And because we were occupied by the Russians for such a long time, it was an easy propaganda to spread. Now, when we tried to work with it before, when we tried to describe that, no, the studies should not be Russian and Eastern European studies and Ukraine somewhere there, when we tried to say, look, Korolev was not Russian, you shouldn't put in the Smithsonian Museum that the inventor of the first rockets and space explorer was Soviet/Russian. No, he was Ukrainian from Zhytomyr. He was imprisoned in Russia because he was considered Ukrainian nationalist, and he was forced to work on the space program while in prison, So, but it takes a lot of time and effort to do that. Now, what we learned during these 15 months is, first, you have to be more open, and you have to say it, and you have to be very vocal about the truth. And from our President Zelensky, who from the first day of this attack took out his phone and became probably the most popular reporter from the front lines and from everywhere, it's not traditional for presidents, it's not traditional for diplomats to do that, but we have to do it. Because in our reality, when social media is becoming increasingly the source of information for so many people, rather than traditional news, rather than TV, this is what we have to do. We all have to be the truth and say it and be open and transparent in our answers. Second, I want to thank the journalists, so many journalists that came to Ukraine right after it started, and they have been our eyes on the front lines in Kyiv, everywhere, been able to show it to others. Third, we have to work together. As you rightfully said, we have been a testing ground for Russian propaganda and disinformation and cyber attacks, which usually come together with the informational attacks, ever since 2013, 2014. And when it was tested on us, then it was tested here. So when we saw this trying to manipulate people here, this is what was done in Ukraine before. So working together and sharing more information together, we can actually achieve more. And I see now how not only our intelligence sharing information, but essentially at each level of the government, each department's sharing more information together, not only bilaterally, but also in G7 format or even wider, actually allows the good people, when we share the information and work together, also achieve more. And fourth, we have to be brave and not be afraid to call propaganda what it is. We have to differentiate clearly between the freedom of speech and outright lies and propaganda and manipulations. Especially when we talk about the social media. In the traditional media, in traditional books, we know how to find for relevant information. We know how to differentiate between the relevant information and white noise, which is a little bit blurred in the YouTube type of and internet and social media. And I think it's, again, this discussion, and it has to be not imposive, but it has to be a very cooperative discussion with all the tech companies, with everyone, and with the society, essentially, that we have to have the electronic libraries too, where we can actually say, no, the information, this is a great BBC or Netflix or other story about the world and nature, and this is a blogger who's completely false when he's trying to say that the Earth is flat or something like this. But the quality of both at this moment is becoming almost the same. So how will the children differentiate? So I think it will require a separate discussion and session just to discuss about that. But it's very important because it's becoming part of all of our lives. We see it on the battlefield, but it's also true in the real peaceful life. So we just have to work together, be more open and be more transparent. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Ambassador, we know how many demands there are on your time, and we're so grateful that you spent a half an hour with us. We stand in solidarity with your country.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'm really grateful to you. Thank you. Thank you for all the support.
Thank you. So now we're having, I don't have a mic.
Do you need a mic?
Here I am. Is it to you? Yes. So that was obviously a wonderful and inspiring talk and an opportunity for us to hear from Ambassador from Ukraine. So let me tell you a bit about how, in fact, this panel and her remarks came about. We wanted to have, again, back to the theme, power shift, where decisions are being made, who are actors, who are the subjects, who's sort of taking control of things. And so the concept behind the ambassadors panel was that we wanted to hear more from the voices of the places in which we work in terms of the challenges they are facing, the decisions they need to be make, their perspective on the other side of the issue. It's one thing to think about going somewhere to doing something. It's another thing to think about who's coming and what are they doing to us and with us. And so, obviously with Ukraine, we see a country with an existential crisis. And we certainly heard that, and we all are seeing that in the news every day. We also chose 2 other countries who are also facing significant challenges, often not of their own making, but certainly challenges that relate to the issues we've talked about throughout the day, whether it's the health challenges, climate change, refugees and migration. All of that are places that we know and see in places like Mozambique and Vanuatu. And so it's going to be my distinct honor first to welcome our moderator for the panel, Ann Simmons-Benton, one of my fellow board members on SID, who, in working with the World Trade Organization and her career with USAID, has, again, worked on these issues, worked in and with Mozambique. Some of you may know I spent 5 years in Mozambique, and so that country's always going to have a special place in my heart. And so first, it's my extreme pleasure to welcome Ambassador Alfredo Nuvunga from Mozambique here. Ambassador Nuvunga just here now, it's his 2nd month here, so let's welcome him to Washington, D.C. And then second, Ambassador Olutevi from Vanuatu is here. Obviously, Vanuatu, it's in the news for me. I'm following climate change very closely. But again, Vanuatu is one of those countries that's at the spear tip of where change is happening in an acute way that impacts everyone in that country and the entire country in a very, very, very serious way. So with that, I want to turn over to the panel and have Ann take us off. Thank you, Ann.
Thank you, Jay. So I'm delighted to be here with both our ambassadors and to really talk about, from the field, from the country, what the existential crises they're facing. We've heard a lot about the global community and partnership today, but we'd like to hear from their lens what the global community can do as well. Climate change is one of those things that we talk about and people think that, oh, we'll get over it, we can do it, it'll happen. But for these countries, it is an everyday existential crisis. We also have different venues, and I'd like us to think about that. Multilateral venues, G20, G7, COP, UN. How do we use these for our global partnership? Are they effective? And to see some great examples, including from Vanuatu recently at the International Court of Justice as a lawyer, I think it's particularly exciting. So I'm going to turn to you now, and I'm going to ask each of you to describe, in your words, the existential crisis that your country is facing for the people and for the nation. So, Ambassador Nunga, I'll start with you.
Thank you so much, and very good evening for everybody. I would want to, good afternoon. I said good evening, it's quiet, so it means people are still awake. Good afternoon to everybody. No, I'm so happy to be in Washington, and I thank the warm welcome words that have been addressed to me. And as a new kid in DC, I might be in the all diplomatic corps, I might be in the group of the youngest or the least. I mean, just my 6 weeks, 6 week years, yes, I'm only 6 to 7 weeks around. But so far I'm happy. So sorry to take you a few minutes just to express how happy I am to be here in DC and share a few words with you about the existential crisis in Mozambique. You will excuse me my phonetics. I'm not an English speaker, so my mother tongue and the Portuguese also will have some influence in the way I pronounce a few words and some names. Mozambique, let me just take you through 3 aspects of Mozambique. First is the geographical location. You know, we are in southeast, the southern part of the continent, by the Indian Ocean. We have a very long coastline, around 2,800 kilometers. So it's quite long. We are having so many rivers flowing into Mozambique, into the Indian Ocean, more than 5. And we have, this is the third aspect, most of the areas in coastal line, they are very at low level, below the sea level. We are also seated on the path of the cyclones, and this has been much more evident in last 5 to 8 years. In a short period of time, we had like more than 10 cyclones hitting the country, and the last one, you might remember, it went into the continent through Mozambique, back to the Indian Ocean, and back again to Mozambique, with such devastating impact in the life of the people. So the challenges that we are having now, because of the impact in terms of climate change, is people have been relocated. People had to be relocated, but again, on top of another challenge with a very, very weak infrastructure. It's not really a solid infrastructure. And the issue of what was existing, schools, public institutions, hospitals, and many other infrastructures have been destroyed. Now we are in a situation where we need some kind of post-disaster reconstruction. And again, this is a challenge because we don't have enough resources. You might imagine we have, our GDP in Mozambique is $15 billion per year, which brings us to a GDP per capita of more or less $400, and 30 million people with all those issues, so the challenges are very, very high. We are not talking about that, but since it has also the same impact in terms of displacing people, destroying infrastructure, I would want to share with you that also we are having the issue of terrorism in some points, in some areas in the northern province of Cabo Delgado, mainly in the areas where we have oil and gas. And we were so happy to have these resources. We thought we could really develop the infrastructure and move the country ahead. But before we start enjoying that, we have been hit by main disaster, which is terrorism. The good thing about terrorism, which is not really good, is that we can't fight it. At a certain point, we will be able to defeat it. When it comes to natural disasters, we just have to be resilient and be alert, educate people. So this is where we are. We need to invest in people, invest in infrastructure, and also at the same time take care of the displaced people, looking forward to a plan of post-disaster reconstruction. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Ambassador Tevi, I'm going to ask you the same question. We follow that. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and let me first take this opportunity to thank SID-US for the invitation. Well, climate change in Vanuatu, it's a small island state in the South Pacific. It's near Australia, New Zealand, and Fiji. It's the location, geographical location. And according to the UN, we are the most vulnerable country in the world for natural disasters. So that is a huge challenge. But we are also on the Pacific Rim of Fire. So we have volcanoes as well. So for natural disasters, I think the extreme natural disasters, especially when we are talking about Category 5 hurricanes, almost every year we have hurricanes, but every 5 years we would have a Category 5 hurricane. So in 2015, we had one, Cyclone Palm, that has eaten away 60% of our GDP. And then during the close-down, the COVID close-down, we had another Category 5. That's within a 5-year period. So we had a Cyclone Harold. And in a few months ago, we had 2 Category 4 cyclones that devastated the capital. So this is the challenge that we are facing. So that's not mentioning the sea level rise. So we are a volcanic island. We have mountains, but there are certain areas where we have islands and people are moving to the bigger islands. So it's a challenge because once you have people who are displaced, in a country, most of the land are communally owned or owned by different types of tribes. So if you are from another tribe who are located to another tribal land, then you are displaced. But not only that, but you lose your land, your rights to your land. So that is a huge challenge for the government. So it is now a government duty to ensure that you have a land, you have a place where you can live. So that's the challenge. Now with the sea level rise, we will have a lot of communities that will have to be moved away from the coastal areas. And some are already moving. So this is the challenge. It devastated our economy, but it affects the most vulnerable people in our societies, especially the women, the children, and disabilities. So this is the major challenge that we are facing with climate change, the disproportional impact of climate change. So, so that's the existential challenge that we are facing. So imagine you have 60% of your economy being removed every 5 years, and you're talking about a climate resilient development. So you know, resilience is a very nice word. It is very expensive. To rebuild your economy, it is very expensive. And from my own experience, and I know a lot of you have been dealing with natural disasters, you have intervention immediately, humanitarian intervention, say from our development partners like Australia, France, and New Zealand. they intervened immediately after the hurricane, which is excellent. But the rebuilding of the economy takes time, so that's the major challenge. So, for example, I would say I saw a picture on Facebook, and thanks to social media, even though they have some negative impacts as well, but thanks. There's some remote area where the library has been blown away, and it's about 7 years now that they didn't have a library, but because they are far away. So this is the challenge that we are facing. And these are areas that there are no, usually government services, they are not reachable. But I think, so when we are talking about climate change or challenge in our countries, it is a major challenge for Vanuatu because it's about how do you build a sustainable economy? How do you build a resilient economy? And that resilience means expensive. The good thing is we are really resilient people because we are used to hurricanes. So because climate change it's a global issue. Vanuatu cannot address it alone. So we need the international forum, international cooperation to address climate change. And Vanuatu has been taking initiative, like you mentioned, the International Court of Justice, which I led at the UN. And it was passed on March 29 by the General Assembly. And by the way, Mozambique was one of the core group members supporting me. But we need the support of the international community, and we did. So it was an example of a multilateralism that worked, where all UN members can come together and adopt it by consensus. So we have no choice but to also rely on international instruments, international institutions like the International Court of Justice, because we need international law to say something, the entirety of the international law. I think it's very important because one is an existential threat, but it is an issue. If you want to address development challenges in Vanuatu, you have to address the global challenges.
Thank you. And I mean, that was the very first climate resolution that the International Court of Justice has ever done. So that's why I think it is so significant. But when we talk about the global community, and this is a global problem, are there venues that actually help countries like yours move forward, get assistance, become more resilient, help to combat climate change? And I'll start with you, Ambassador Teve. I know you spent some time in New York at the UN and other organizations. So are those helpful organizations? Is the bureaucracy too much? I mean, how can Vanuatu, take advantage of those sorts of things?
Well, we know about the nature of these multilateral institutions. I mean, there's a lot of bureaucracy and it's slow moving because a lot of things we have to either adopt it by consensus or, we have to negotiate over time. And of course, we have to arrive at a consensus. So there's only one word, but it can take 2-3 days to resolve that one word. So that's the challenge with multilateralism. But that's the nature of it. That's the beast, that's the nature of it. But I think for a country like Vanuatu, as a small state, an institution like United Nations is very important. An institution like the World Bank, the IMF, or the Asian Development Bank in our region is very important because these are the avenues where we can discuss our issues, and this is where the global community comes. Like I've mentioned, climate change, it's an issue that has to be addressed globally, and it affects us, so we are at the front line. So these are the areas, these are the avenues where the global community comes together and discuss this issue. So we have no choice. We have to live with some of those bureaucracy. But this is where small states or developing countries can also have a say on the agenda and try and influence it. I think that's very important, influencing the agenda. So in these types of international forum, we would come together as small states, maybe the Alliance of Small States or Pacific Small States coming together, or the G77, that's including Africa in a bigger scale. We would come together and try to discuss some of these common challenges at the international arena. And they are all specialized. Like, for example, at the WTO, it talks about climate and World Trade Organization and climate and trade. So they're all specialized. The United Nations in New York, It's general. We discuss a lot of issues. In Geneva, we discuss the nexus between human rights and climate change and development. And at the World Bank, we do discuss financing. And the IMF, we discuss financing as well, and macroeconomic stability, and how banks and the international finance can respond to these climate challenges. So this is a very important institution. I think the current international architecture is very important, and we need to protect it. I think that's very important. And this is the only avenue where small states or even developing countries can have a say and try and influence the agenda, because most of our challenges now are global in nature.
Thank you. Ambassador Navunga, from Mozambique's perspective, what do you think about those multilateral venues? And I believe you hold the presidency of the UN Security Council now.
Thank you very much again. I agree with my colleague from Vanuatu. For small countries like Mozambique, Vanuatu, multilateral forums are very crucial. Of course, we engage on a bilateral basis, but multilateral institutions, they do help a lot. We are talking about the UN, like the ambassador has just said here. We are talking about many other specialized institutions, like the IMF, the World Bank, and the African Development Bank in case of Africa. Right now, like you rightly said, you did put it, we are a non-permanent member of the UN Security Council for these 2 years, 2023 and 2024. And we did chair the UN Security during the month of March. So we came up with a number of priorities. I can name 3 or 4. The first one is the fight for peace and security, where we included terrorism, which is something that hits Mozambique. The issue of climate change, that was one, because we felt that that is the platform and it's a common challenge as well. And the issue of development and women, inclusion of women. These were really at the forefront that we brought in, and we are still trying to champion those elements in that particular forum. Now, in case of Mozambique, just to give the importance, stress the importance of multilateral and regional organization, we came up with this strategy. Okay, in Mozambique, we came up with an action plan, but then we move into the region. We have SADC, which is Southern African Development Community, where we brought our experience. Being the kind of a gateway to all these cyclones, we thought we could share some experience with our neighbors and other member states in SADC. How can we increase the resilience, not only to respond, but also to anticipate the issue of climate change and reduce the impact on people, not having many distractions, not having people dying. So we convinced the region that we needed a center, humanitarian and emergency operation. We have this center now is in Mozambique, based in northern part of Mozambique, close to Zambezi River, just a little bit south of Zambezi River. At the level of African Union, then we move at the level of continent. Like we said, those are common problems. It's either you have floods, droughts, cyclones, and all those things, you name it. So we thought we could take a contribution to the African Union, and it was agreed, all African countries, that they decided to appoint Mozambique as a champion for risk disaster management in Africa, so that we really share our experience, but also the challenges, and together try to come to a solution. So this is how we value all these international platforms. We worked with the African Development Bank, and also we are working with the World Bank. Right now, now coming to a bilateral sphere, because the multilateral exists because you have individual countries coming together. We are also working with the United States of America and financing a very important component in Zambezia. Zambezia is up in the center of Mozambique, to develop infrastructure that is resilient to issues of climate change. Right now, negotiations are still on, and we will benefit from part of that financing. So these are the things that we think we can do together, especially when it comes to these global challenges.
And if I could just ask you one more final question, because these are all development practitioners in this room and online. What one thing would you ask for your country? Doesn't have to be one, but what would you ask for your country? I mean, I hear from you, like I'm hearing infrastructure, resilient infrastructure, engineers maybe to help design this with the center, but that's one exciting idea I hear. But what would you choose as the idea to help these professionals think about how to help your country and country like yours facing these existential crises? I'll start with you, Ambassador Navunga, this time.
Okay. Maybe let me just put what we are doing in Mozambique. We are working with the responders, the first victims when there's a natural disaster, capacitating them, empowering them to help the others. Because the low rate of education also helps a lot. If you're there for 5, 6 years, you're not hit by any cyclone, things are happening like 10 kilometers away, there's a tendency to believe that, well, these things will never happen to me because all over and over it goes into that area. But then the information, dissemination of information, we are working with committees. Now there are around close to 2,000, group of 18 people, volunteers. They are not having any salary. They are trained, they are made aware of the issues of climate change so that they can help use bicycles, cell phones, and radio to help those are staying in vulnerable areas not to really stay there any longer because it's dangerous. These are the people that would want some help to them. Those kids, like I mentioned, they might sound small. In a country like this one, you use a bicycle for jogging. But there in Mozambique, it's really a means of transport, and it's a valuable thing that you can use. A cell phone, a simple one, you can pass messages and alert people and save lives. So we can start with those small things, trying to provide those kits to people to work, because the cyclone is over and over. Now in October this year, we are start having the rain season. We are going to have all those problems. On the side of the institutions, that's why it's a little bit heavier because the investments are too big. We need to reconstruct the country. We need to rebuild the country, but not with the same structures that we had before, the ones that are much more resilient. And we need really your support in investing. How can you build roads that even if there's a disaster coming up, people can move from one place to another, even to make it faster for them to run for their life? How can you assure that the chain of production is there? You have food somewhere, but then the road is cut off by the floods. Nobody can move, and people are dying in one side, and people are having food rotting on another side. So this would be the other side where you could work hand in hand with the government to build the infrastructure and also with the local communities.
Thank you very much for your answer. Ambassador Tevi, if you could close us out with your response.
Well, I think one thing, I mean, for countries that are in the front line of climate change, we know the solutions. But I think maybe we need, or in the international community, or the civil society, or the international development organization, or governments to listen to these communities. I think it's very important. At the government level, I have seen that they talk about these huge infrastructure investments, and we took about 4, 5, even 7 years to take off. So within 7 years, you have a lot of things happening already on the ground. So I think to find a solution where we can act immediately to the challenges that they are facing and listening to them. They have the solutions. How do we ensure that they have the tools to address the challenges that they face? I think that's the challenge going forward. Maybe in terms of technology, in terms of capacity building, in terms of writing projects. I think these are small but practical things, but very important. Because at the government level, we can talk about huge infrastructure projects, but we know these are bulky, and it will take about 4, 5 years, even 7 years for it to be implemented on the ground. So they are faced with climate realities every day, and they face challenges every day. And how do we address those immediate challenges? I think that's very important. And if we can find a solution, they have the solution, they know the solution, but how do we help them address those challenges?
Thank you. And it seems it brings back Anne-Marie Slaughter, some of her remarks earlier on, that we really need a network at the local level for the responders. We need to engage the multilateral institutions to really stand up and support and to create this network. But these problems are a big global challenge that are not going to go away tomorrow, and we need to act a lot faster. Thank you so much for sharing your insight, and I hope our community can help move really faster. But before we leave the stage, I just want to let you know that Roger Ford will be coming up here and announcing the innovation competition winner. And stay tuned because we have the Undersecretary at Treasury coming. So thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Great to see you all. My name is Roger Ford. I'm the Global Lead and Managing Director for Accenture Development Partnerships. I also serve, this is my 5th year serving on the Society for International Development Board of Directors, so representing all of you with the rest of the community across international development. So it's great to be here once again. This year, we are, as Accenture, the sponsor for the innovation competition. One of my favorite parts of this conference, because if you think about it, innovation is what's driving solutions that will be resilient and sustainable around the world. It's innovation combined with all of the talent in this room and beyond, and it's working across the sectors as well. So working together, hand in hand, corporations, government, and civil society and implementers to advance those SDGs. So this has been an amazing year of innovation. The entries we received came across from around the world, dozens of entries. The SID team, as well as other judges, spent a lot of time going through all of these entries. They were all amazing, to be honest. And it's really hard when you announce one of these winners to not say that everyone is a winner. But I will tell you that we narrowed the field down to 5 finalists. If you had an opportunity to see the panel that I moderated this afternoon, you got to hear from each of these innovators. First of all, BAO Systems, the analytics platform, B-Protect by Comonix, drone technology for malaria vector control in Madagascar by Apt Associates, and a set of tools for documenting war damages in agriculture by Comonix. And finally, Shift by Save the Children. Each of these represented some of the best ideas across the field. We also had a field of judges from the group here, including Mohammed Abdel Kader, who's the USAID Chief Innovation Officer, Nick Martin, the CEO of TechChange, Catherine Ruskowski, who's the Senior Director of Global Sustainability at McCormick, and myself. And finally, we had all of you had the opportunity, both online and in person, to vote for the best of show. And I'll be honest, this is the first time I think I've seen this, in that both the judges and all of you voted for the winner. and that is drone technology for malaria vector control in Madagascar by Apt Associates. Congratulations. Yeah, really an amazing innovation. You have to have the opportunity to take a look at this. I've heard about it for a while, but it is one of the best uses of drone technology. You have these drones flying over the rice fields, dropping a larvicide, and it's been absolutely effective, 95 to 97% effective in the reduction of malaria, ultimately saving or preventing malaria in over 81,000 people in Madagascar. And they want to take this technology and this capability global. So it really is, when you think about drones, you're always like, well, what does this really mean at scale? This is one of those solutions that you can really point to as being effective in what it's doing. And I'd like to, congratulate Carrie Ann Gaia, who's the PMI Vector Link Project Technical Project Lead, for taking this forward along with USAID. At this point, I would like to now introduce our last lightning talk. It's a little video that you've been hearing about these all day before we move on to the Undersecretary. And the final winner is Mame Dara Embe, who's from Management Sciences for Health, and she'll be talking about the importance of comprehensive health systems. So turn your attention to the screens, and thank you again. Great to see you all.
Hello, my name is Mame Jarambe. I am from Dakar, Senegal. I work with Management Science for Health. I have been to the US to study nursing in Dallas, Texas. I got my medical degree at the University of Ottawa. I returned back to Senegal in 2016. I've been working with international NGOs since then to support improvement for healthcare for the Senegalese people. Health inequities and disparities are big issues that currently exist in low and middle income countries, as these countries continue to rely too heavily on donor-funded intervention to serve the health needs of their population. This approach is unsustainable. It does not focus enough on improving health outcomes or eliminating disparities, nor is it the best use of foreign investment. The power shift that will define the next decade of development puts more emphasis on building comprehensive healthcare systems based on country-specific needs, rather than funding disease-specific intervention. In other words, not only should donors focus on activities that holistically strengthen a country's health system, but countries also must harmonize donor-funded intervention with their own investments. This will help prioritize equitable health outcomes and reduce health disparities. Why does it matter? Well, because poor population health can have a significant impact on economic development. In Senegal, for example, prioritizing equitable health outcomes can help ensure that the health system is prepared to respond to any public health emergency, and most importantly, that everyone has access to the quality of care they need to stay healthy. We've seen some of this coordinated approach in action. Basic donor-funded intervention, for example, to improve maternal and child health care, are complemented with domestic efforts to provide free childhood vaccination, improve skills of health personnel, or community awareness campaigns that have actually resulted in a 15% reduction in child mortality rate. These improvements are the result of the government's own investment in increasing health services and health education in coordination with donor-funded programs. However, a lot of work still remains. The law in Senegal only provides 2 months for maternal leave. Meanwhile, donor-funded projects are promoting 6-month exclusive breastfeedings. This type of misalignment weakens the impact of health intervention that can truly help improve health outcomes and reduce disparities. So countries like Senegal should focus more on building holistic health systems by shoring up their limited domestic resource for health with donor-funded interventions. Likewise, donors will do well to support countries in identifying critical ways in which their donation can best support each country's journey towards building a strong and sustainable health system that leaves no one behind. Thank you.
Okay, it's been an excellent day, and we have our final speaker. Good afternoon. I am Leland Cruvant, President and CEO of Creative Associates International. Before I introduce our final speaker, the distinguished Dr. Jay Shamba. I would like to take a moment to thank all the previous presenters and specifically the Ambassador of Ukraine to the United States. I know I speak for all of us when I say to Ambassador Markarova, thank you for your service and leadership. I think it's quite telling of the organizations and people of this room that you came to visit us this afternoon. I recently traveled to Kyiv and I saw firsthand the remarkable resilience of the Ukrainian people, and I am inspired by their credo, winning the war, winning the future. Our next plenary speaker, Dr. Jay Shamba, accompanied Secretary Yellen in February on her visit to Kyiv, where they saw up close the evidence of Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine. As Undersecretary, he has been at the forefront of America's economic support for Ukraine. No doubt he will discuss in greater detail today the Biden-Harris administration's commitment to Ukraine. When SID-US asked me to introduce Jay as our plenary speaker, I was quite excited, as I am a committed economics nerd. I find the work of the International Affairs Office to be very compelling. As the Undersecretary, Jay and his team focus on policy issues and the management of the U.S. contributions to the World Bank, the regional development banks, and the International Monetary Fund, other multilateral funds. Jay serves as our nation's top financial diplomat, working in close collaboration with our allies on monetary and exchange rate policy. The work is vast, and it touches on topics that everyone in this room follows and is working on, issues like climate change and food security. During a speech he gave at Brookings last month, the Undersecretary said, and I quote, "We are in a pivotal point in international development," end quote. And then his comments foreshadowed this conference's theme, Power Shift, defining the next decade in development. I think you're in the right room today, and I think we have the right speaker. As we well know, these pivots present challenges and opportunities for U.S. foreign policy, for us as implementers, and the people we seek to support around the world. Fortunately, Jay is well prepared for this. He joined the Biden administration in 2022 after spending years at the Brookings Institution. Before that, he was a member of President Obama's Council of Economic Advisors from 2015 to 2017. He is a professor of economics and international affairs at the George Washington University. Before that, he was teaching at Georgetown, and before that at Dartmouth, and a visiting scholar at the IMF. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Dr. Jay Shamba, the Undersecretary of International Affairs at the U.S. Department of Treasury. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Leland, and thank you to the Society of International Development for welcoming me to this conference. I hate to disappoint you, but I actually don't plan to talk too much about our support for Ukraine right here today, but to talk about some of our issues around development policy. Support for Ukraine is something that occupies a very large amount of my time, and something that all of us are incredibly proud to work on every day as we do. When I look out at this group, I know that you represent the diversity and broad scope of professionals working on international development, and I know that we share a common commitment to working more effectively and impactfully on development challenges confronting the world now and in the years to come. And I really think the theme for this conference is quite well chosen, defining the next decade of development. And I really want to start by offering some of Treasury's views on the perspective of recent challenges that have hit the world economy, which have thrown into stark relief some of the needs that will define the next decade, very relevant to what you've all been talking about today. So we've faced successive shocks over the last 2.5 years, including the loss of life and economic disruption from the COVID-19 pandemic, the destruction and elevated energy and food prices and other spillovers from Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, which has exacerbated global inflation and also, though, the increasingly severe and impactful climate change and climate events that we've seen hitting many countries. So in these cases, the economic impact is not really the main story. COVID caused massive loss of life and a huge disruption to people around the world. Russia's war is an immoral violation of a nation's sovereignty, and climate change impacts lives and livelihoods in the most vulnerable people very directly. But still, the economic shock from each of these was quite consequential as well. The pandemic had immediate and unprecedented effect on global economy and global financial system. Low-income countries had less fiscal space to deal with the challenges and fewer resources, and we've seen backsliding in global poverty and development since. Only 2 years later, in February 2022, as a nascent recovery was just starting to take hold, Russia's war on Ukraine once again sent a new shock through the system. And this invasion was not only an affront to the world's conscience, an assault on our collective right to peace and stability, but it was also a shock to the global economy. The global economy was hit with sharp commodity shortages, which exacerbated inflation and debt dynamics and created widespread risks to food and energy security for many around the world. And as many have noted, the effects of climate change are really no longer something that we can talk about in the future tense. It's something that we're increasingly seeing major climate-driven events hitting countries around the world, with the effects more often than not more severe in poorer countries. So altogether, these global shocks have taken a terrible toll in terms of lives lost, livelihoods disrupted, rising poverty, and slower economic growth. Today, it is clearer than ever that transboundary challenges such as climate change, pandemics, and challenges around fragility and conflict are disproportionately affecting the poorest and the most vulnerable. Put simply, it is no longer possible to fully deliver on our development agenda without addressing global challenges with the urgency and scale that they require. The United States strongly supports the 2030 Agenda, and bold action is needed to address global challenges that threaten to set back progress towards reducing poverty and achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. To achieve all these goals, we're making changes to the system. So, the multilateral development banks have much of the know-how to address crises like the ones we've been facing. They have deep expertise and for a wide range of development challenges, and they have the capacity to innovate, something very relevant to the day you've been spending here today. They spread policy knowledge and innovative tools. They engage partner countries and promote high standards investment. Crucially, these organizations lend at low rates below what most low-income countries could find in the market. And unlike really any other lender, when times get tough, they increase lending and increase grants and increase concessionality. These institutions provide countries a critical lifeline during times of crisis and transition. They're real firefighters rushing to increase lending when trouble starts. The United States is the largest or a major shareholder across many of these institutions, and we at Treasury really view it as one of our most important roles to help the MDBs act as a key bulwark in the fight against poverty and for development. Our focus now is really on equipping the MDBs to deliver solutions to ever more complex global challenges with greater speed, agility, and focus, as well as encouraging the banks to innovate and work better together. Secretary Yellen launched a call to action 6 months ago for the MDBs to evolve, and we've made good initial progress since then at the World Bank on the mission, the model, and the money. Examples of the ongoing work at the World Bank include modernizing the mission to integrate building resilience into the twin goals of reducing poverty and boosting shared prosperity, strengthening the bank's operational model to integrate global challenges into the analytical work, the country strategies, and the results framework, and increasing the bank's financing capacity by implementing recommendations from the G20 capital adequacy framework. The initial steps taken on the implementation of these recommendations are expected to add up to $50 billion in additional financing over the next decade by stretching existing resources and pursuing innovative measures while maintaining the bank's financial sustainability and its AAA rating. And we could compare that roughly $5 billion a year in new lending capacity over the next decade to the roughly $6 billion a year increase in the bank's lending as a result of the last capital increase. So this is real money on the table. But this evolution agenda is about far more than providing money to continue the status quo. Countries around the world need these institutions to work well. So we have made a lot of progress so far. We still have a lot more to do. And let me briefly delve into some of the key challenges we face: climate, health, food security, and debt. So the United States continues to work through the multilateral and bilateral financial institutions to meet President Biden's commitment to provide more than $11 billion in climate finance by 2024 and to deliver on developed countries' collective $100 billion annual climate finance mobilization goal. Treasury is working to scale and to mobilize and align global financial flows to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement, and I'll highlight a few areas there. So first, the administration is trying to deliver on the climate goals through the Inflation Reduction Act. The IRA aims to increase the production of clean energy and building resilient, clean supply chains. And investments in the new technologies in the United States, the hope is, will also lower the cost of these technologies around the world. Second, we're working with the World Bank and the regional MDBs as they begin aligning financial operations with the Paris Agreement. And we are also working to reimagine the climate finance architecture, which is often too cluttered with too many different funds and different structures. Third, our work to deliver on the just energy transition partnerships is essential. Through these JETPs with high-emitting emerging markets, we seek to bring together different players in support of ambitious partner country energy transition commitments. Fourth, we're committed to scaling up effective climate finance for developing countries to help both with adaptation and changing technology and mitigation to stave off the worst outcomes. Fifth, we're helping the private sector play its crucial role by working on net zero commitments as well as private sector mobilization via venues like the Sustainable Finance Working Group of the G20. And lastly, we're looking at climate-related financial risks at Treasury. Governments, regulators, and private companies all must coordinate to better understand and manage the climate risks that we face these days. By no means is this an exhaustive list of all the work that's taking place at Treasury or at International Affairs on climate, but it gives some sense of the efforts that we're trying to put forward. So when we think about health, as COVID painfully demonstrated, we all bear the cost of not addressing major global health challenges that pose a significant risk. We must do more to strengthen the global health architecture today to avoid future human suffering and the economic backsliding that takes place in a pandemic. That's why the United States was early to call for a dedicated financing mechanism to help address gaps in pandemic preparedness and response. And after nearly a year of working with our international partners in the G20, the Pandemic Fund was launched to help fill these gaps. This was a major accomplishment, something that usually doesn't take place quite that quickly, and something that we were all very proud of that this took place, to have a significant initiative like this put together at speed and scale when it was needed. The United States has contributed $450 million to the Pandemic Fund, which has helped unlock $1.6 billion in total investments. But more is needed to meet the $10 billion per year target that experts say is needed. And this is why the President announced another $250 million contribution at the G7 Leader Summit, and why the FY 2024 budget requests an additional $500 million for the Pandemic Fund. When we think about food security, as we all well know, we're facing long-standing and also some modern challenges to food security. Climate change and regional conflicts have strained the global food system for some time. More recently, COVID-19's economic disruption and Russia's illegal war in Ukraine have further exacerbated the strain on food systems, and the level of food insecurity at this point is truly alarming. Secretary Yellen has highlighted the urgent need to leverage the global food security architecture to address both acute humanitarian suffering and also to accelerate medium and long-term investments so that the food system itself can transform. Scaling up investment in sustainable food and agriculture systems with a focus on the nexus of food security and climate change will help build resilience to future shocks and hopefully reduce future humanitarian needs as well. And we've made important progress under the International Financial Institution Action Plan to address food insecurity that was announced last year alongside the IMF's food shock window, including the World Bank's swift implementation of its $30 billion commitment. The United States has complemented these efforts with a commitment of more than $13 billion to address humanitarian and longer-term food security needs. And working closely with counterparts to find new solutions will be essential to our success. And so we now have a strategic partnership with the African Union, which is advancing food security goals through a focus on soil management, food system resilience, and logistics and infrastructure, so that Africa can not only grow and cultivate food effectively, but also store and transport it efficiently. And we'll continue working through the international financial institutions where we're a shareholder to meet these goals. I'd like to turn now to debt vulnerabilities, which present a major hurdle to the economic recovery of lower and middle income countries. More than half of low income countries at this point are either in or near debt distress. And debt crises have devastating economic, social, and humanitarian impacts, underscoring the importance that all creditors expedite the completion of outstanding debt restructuring cases and that borrowers in debt distress have the means to securely acquire or securely get adequate debt treatments. At the forefront of our agenda is to durably tackle the debt distress in low and middle income countries that have already presented themselves so we could help borrowers restore debt sustainability and achieve economic recovery. Through our engagements at the G20 and the Paris Club, we have been actively working with creditor and debtor countries to complete the outstanding common framework and non-common framework restructuring cases as quickly as possible. We know the common framework has been far too slow, and we are pushing hard to improve the speed and predictability of the framework and to bring much-needed clarity on how the process works so that countries can enter the process knowing they will get timely debt treatment. We're also seeking to strengthen multilateral coordination for restructuring middle-income country cases as well. It's really in everyone's collective interest to durably address debt sustainability risks. Helping debtor countries achieve their development and economic goals supports health of the global economy and really matters for our own economy as well. So finally, we'll continue leading the charge in partnership really with all of you for greater accountability and transparency at the multilateral institutions of which we are a shareholder. We all need MDB projects to be successful, and for that to happen, MDBs must prepare projects transparently, with robust stakeholder engagement, and in an inclusive manner. We've used our role within these institutions to advocate for greater access and disclosure of information, including information related to procurement, to have a stronger environmental, social, and governance safeguards to avoid, minimize, and mitigate negative impacts from lending, and to encourage a culture of learning and accountability in these institutions. We see this work to increase transparency, including advocating for robust and independent accountability mechanisms, as fundamental to our efforts to promote greater development impact and effectiveness. So I'd like to close by reiterating a note of support for the vital work that all of you do here. The multilateral institutions that I've been talking about provide essential expertise on challenging and complex long-term problems and their solutions, and they provide funds that are much less expensive than countries can access on global capital markets, and they do so in a transparent and accountable manner. They are creative and innovative and essential to the world, and our work to better equip them with the tools for today's challenges is an investment in their continued and future success. We have many new challenges to face, but we will also not lose sight of the fact that the overriding goals of this work is to eradicate extreme poverty and bring opportunity and hope to people trapped in situations with little of either, and drive forward sustainable development. It is, in part, in all of your hands to push for the innovations we need to do this work in the face of multiple global shocks, and to work with our partner countries along the way. And so I just really want to thank you for all the crucial work that all of you are doing, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with you here today. Thanks.
It's been a day, y'all. All right, so we started off talking about our theme. And I hope that with the rich agenda, the fantastic speakers we've had, the sessions, both in-person and virtual, that if you care about issues in international development, you found a way to feast. Because I think the theme that you agreed on, that you proposed and you approved, and the program, the committee, and particularly Catherine's team put together to make this the fantastic day it was, I think was something that could and should have been enriching to us all. So I want to thank everyone, particularly Catherine's team at SID-US, who put this together for us. I also want to thank my fellow board members who led on the conference committee and really worked supporting me as their OK chair to drive this program and work with Catherine and her staff to put this together. I want to thank my board chairs and members. The other thing is, I challenged everybody this morning, right? The challenge was meet 5 people you hadn't met before, learn 5 things you didn't know before. Then at lunchtime, I pulled a wizzo on you and I upped the challenge to 10. So I just want to see hands who met the challenge. Met 10 people you hadn't met before, found out 10 things you didn't know before. All right, pretty good, pretty good. Congratulations to all of you. What's interesting is that, virtually, we're kind of doing the same thing in terms of engagement. And so I'm happy to announce, and they were running on a point system, so next year, we need to figure out a way to do an in-person point system the way they did a point system virtually. That's going to be for some other chair, right? But let me get my glasses. So for the virtual point contest, the person with the highest points online, points for engagement on the platforms, was Chibukwe Utake with 870 points. Chibukwe is from Nigeria. Congratulations to him. Now, there's another thing I didn't mention this morning, but it came up in a conversation I had with someone I met while here. And that is, we've talked a lot about content, the subject matter, the issues, the challenges, the approaches, the solutions. What she challenged me with, I'm not going to say her name, but what she challenged me with is, but what about the feeling? What about the fact that we are humans, we're together here? Can we talk more about that? I think that's a really valid point, because part of what we've done here is bring people together, more people than ever before, both in person and online. Part of what this is about, part of why you engage, is in fact this human connection that we all have that's really filtered through our mission, our dedication to this work. And so I really want to emphasize, in fact, that I think that's one of the biggest benefits of this conference is, in fact, that human connection, these instant reunions, or the ideas that have been sparked, the meeting of new people with whom you're going to follow up later, the connections that are formed that may go on and start today, but last for years and decades, as I've had relationships with some of you for years and, in fact, decades. So the human part of the power shift, I think, is also important. So I want to recognize that as part of the benefit here. Finally, I want to just thank all of you for being here today. I hope that Power Shift, the next decade of development, has been a valuable experience for you. And if that isn't enough, I'm able to announce that available immediately across the hall is an open bar. So thank you.